upon the ruined town. Those of you so close to this place, your heart, I suspect, beyond black, consider what occurred here. And I thought it prudent that as I had been a burgess, but for one session, that mayhaps I should make my way here, avail myself to the commissioners, plead to them that I am an unbiased man, if they should be desirous to hear the voice of one unbiased. But before I would that, I should like to meet with your approbation to explain it to you, for I will not deceive you or any other person of this country. I will speak as I bore witness, but if he would allow me then, I will afford you what I will tell the commissioners if I am asked to do so. Well enough?
Yes.
Well, the first on then, for those of you that recognize not my face, my name, I am Thomas Matthew. I am a merchant from the northern neck, the furthest neck to the north in Virginia. My principal seat is Northumberland County, Cherry Point, in Mount Tracy Parish. But through a course of opportunities and blessings from God Almighty, I came to own some property in the westernmost county of Virginia, Stafford, the western and most northern county. But before I offer any of my people's doings in this business, I would remind the commissioners of that you all remember, I'm sure, right well, those three presages that did occur 2 years past, the summer of 1675. The first, you recall that comet that did appear every evening in the southwest, mayhaps 35 degrees high, streaming across the western horizon, like a mare's tail, was it not? For a week or more, and after a week, as it would each eve disappear to the northwest, after a week it was gone. A curiosity that in itself, but no great import, save the fact that after that, those streams of pigeons that appeared, blackening half the hemisphere, did they not? For hours upon a time, they would roost at night in the branches of the tallest trees, breaking them, the great weight of all of these pigeons. They were the ancient planters, those that had been about in the last great uprising, that recall it with confidence that such a thing occurred back in '44, before the last great Indian uprising. And that caused the entirety of the countryside to stir this ill omen. And the third of the three were those flies that did come out of little spigot holes in the ground, nigh on the size of a man's little finger, the end, an inch long, that did eat the green leaves off the trees. And after 3 weeks, a month, they too were gone. Each of these separate, a curiosity, but the three together, everyone was talking. Agreed, eh? You all remember? In the week or so, it was certain some evil would play forth for them. For my own part, it was my property, west Stafford County. My overseer there, Mr. Kimmy, he wrote me a letter inquiring if it would be permissible for him to hire a herdsman, and that we cleared a great stand of trees, had land for grazing, for sheep, cattle. And I agreed with him, and he hired one, a man whose name Robert Hen. thought little of it at the time. Now I reflect back on it. This man Hen seemed to be of sober nature. But less than 2 months after I hired him, on a July Sabbath morning, as the neighbors were passing by bound for church, they made inquiry to see if Hen would accompany them. And as they approached this place, laid toward the threshold was this man, Robert Hen, with tammy-hack marks to his head and his body in a most rude fashion. The neighbors drew him close as he gasped his last, and the last that he spoke, Dahoots, Dahoots, speaking of the Dog Indians. Well, of course, the Stafford County Militia, they mustered, and 2 groups were set in motion. They quickly found a trail of native people that had crossed over the Potomac River. They crossed into Maryland, and they did, all as one body, until a fork in the trail, and each then divided, half to one, half to the other, and at each they found, again, a very rude country cabin, fortified, a fort of sorts. At the first, they laid siege to it, and nigh on near sunrise, for they approached at night, shots began to issue forth from inside that cabin. The refugees, no doubt. The militia returned fire, and soon enough they began to issue forth out of it, trying to make their break. I'm told that perhaps as many as 8, 10 were killed. And they felt some confidence there. Perhaps they had captured the rest, those that held a hand in the death of Mr. Hen. But upon hearing the sound issuing forth from the one fort, the other fort, the other house, the other fort, they began to fire out wildly in defense. The militia there returned fire. And soon enough they began to spring forth to make their way. 10 or 12 of them were cut down until one came up and shook a man he recognized his arm, speaking to him in his tongue that they were friendly Susquehannocks, to which the militia officer then immediately, for the sake of God, stopped firing. These are our friends. They had fired upon the Dog Indians, the culprits, but as well the dogs had sought sanctuary, thinking to blend in with friendly tributary Indians, and they killed a number of them. Well, you can see the ruination here as reprisals began back across the Potomac River in the plantations furthest to the west along the frontier. At the falls of the Rappahannock River, and further up the York, the Pamunkey, and the Mattapony as well, at the curls and the falls of the James. Reprisals back and forth. By the spring of last year, 1676, over 300 colonists were dead. Some argued the same number of Indians, but it made no matter. The governor pleaded with those upon the frontier to continue to make peace with the tributary Indians that he had struggled for years to establish rapport with, a buffer against those further to the west, the like of the Dogs. But to no avail. there were those that determined that the governor should have no voice in them. For the governor, well, not there, but here. There was the group upriver here at Henrico. A man recently arrived here, a young man, tall, black hair, black eyes, a quiet countenance, Nathaniel Bacon. It would appear that he wanted no part of this until his overseer, whom he loved very much, was killed. And with that, he sent dispatches to the governor pleading for permission to go fight the Indians. And the governor, again, concerned that the friendly tributary Indians would be cut off, refused. One evening, at a gathering upriver, I'm told it was Jordan's Point, I know not exactly where, a group of men in their couples begin to chant for Nathaniel Bacon to lead. And this young man, ambitious. So what young man is not ambitious? But to hear these calls, encouraging, he determined he would lead them. First he did was cross the James and attack friendly Appomattox Indians that had for years served as a buffer against Indians toward the south. He then gathered a large number of men, perhaps as many as 200, and marched south and west toward the North Carolina border. The Occaneechi Indians that had held a buffer against the Cherokee further toward the south and west. A great trading post the Occaneechis held for the fur trade. The fur trade that the governor had always in the past been deliberate about allowing commissions to trade for fear that there would be those that would take advantage of them. Nathaniel Bacon, in right, had discovered that some of the Dog Indians who escaped fled that direction. Whether they were seeking sanctuary with the Occaneechi, I don't know. But his advisors assured him that's where they were. They fell to it. The Occaneechi at first afforded them food, for it had been a long march. The Occaneechi dwelt, their village principals, on an island. They thought then that all was well with the Occaneechi and would ally, send men to help them track down the Dog Indians. But as night fell, a shot issued forth from the Occaneechi village toward Mr. Bacon's men, killing one. This apparently threw Mr. Bacon into a rage, and he turned on them. They crossed the body of water to the island, set fire to it all, and killed, I am told, 150 men, women, and children, and took all the furs. They came back as great Indian fighters, champions of the cause, heroes, but as well the governor. He damned them as rebels. He put a price to seek Mr. Bacon's parole to come here to surrender himself as the traitor to the colony that he was, so the governor said. And simultaneous, the governor issued forth a call for new burgesses to be elected. There were those in Stafford, knowing the business with my Mr. Hen and my involvement in Stafford County, that were most desirous for me to stand as a burgess there. I will tell you, I never held any curiosity, any inclination toward the precarious intrigues of government. My hand's always busy with my own business. But because of several singular debts owed, they placed me in a position I could not deny. Several of these leading gentlemen I stood and was elected, not from my home, Northumberland County, but from Stafford County. I arrived here on June 6th. The business was to begin on the 8th. I arrived to be told late the 6th that all was well. Mr. Bacon had been taken up. I understood this not, but through conversations with others it became clear that when the election had been held, Nathaniel Bacon had been elected as the Burgesses, one of two for Henrico County. I thought this all, that a man condemned as a traitor, a rebel to the colony, could be elected successfully as a leader, but he had been. Apparently, he arrived here on the evening of the 6th and spirited himself into town meeting with two gentlemen of the town, Mr. Drummond and Mr. Lawrence. Lawrence apparently had attended the Inns of Court. A learned man, an enlightened man, I fear, that the governor despised, because on occasion our governor, a monarchist, Lord Charles I, and certainly now Lord Charles II, the politics did not mix well. He despised him. He held a tavern just yonder, of course you know this. Mr. Drummond, William Drummond, a sober Scotchman, had as well had a political row in the past with the governor. But apparently Mr. Bacon met with these two men the night of the 6th, and the next morning surrendered himself to Sheriff Hunt. Now, while I take no great joy in taking you about, I will do this for the commissioners. I should move you, I think, to where we can better gaze upon the burned out hulk of our State House. For the rest continues there, and I apologize, I sincerely do, for how it may affect some of you to gaze upon it. But it is of great import that they see the place as I describe the action. Do you agree?
Yes.
Come along. There it is, the burned out hulk. As you know, two stories as it stands there, all drunk and dark. The furthest to the east I will explain to the commissioners that the first floor was where the council and the general court were, and above the stairwell, the entirety of this inn, the east end. The second floor was the assembly hall. But of course, the governor, he kept it the westernmost inn, a private apartment, a quoit's throw, 33 feet to the west, from the entrance there to the council chamber. As I speak, apparently Mr. Bacon arrived on the evening of June 6th, last year, 1676, was taken up after his meeting with Mr. Drummond and Lawrence. I was told that the governor, upon receiving him from Mr. Holmes, asked him, Mr. Bacon, have you forgotten to be a gentleman? To which he replied, no, if it please your honor. He was put in chains and taken to the rear of the building. There was a public jail, a cell. I came ashore on the morning of the 8th, or I had come down the river and in my sloop, docked just here. We were called to assembly. The morning of the 8th, I went above stairs, was swarmed. The big businesses, it was all new to me, was laid forth the docket of the business we were to deal upon. The tariffs, attempting to raise funds to satisfy Parliament due to the war with the Dutch, the rest of the business of the colony. Near mid-morning, we were called below. My first entering the council chamber in the general court space. The governor sat in his chair, a large, fine chair. And there's, we piled in. Mr. Bacon, upon his knees, in chains, stooped before him. We thought this awkward at best, that he were this way. None of us dared speak, the governor in silent, stern, straight ahead his aspect was. A long silence, deafening, several minutes after we were all in, and the governor was informed of this. Silence, he said. And then he rose, and he said to the assembly, if there be joy in heaven at one penitent sinner come forth, there's joy amongst the angels now, for we have a penitent sinner amongst us. He sat back down. Then he asked Mr. Bacon if he had something to speak. And he began to read, in chains, upon bended knees, a confession, asking forgiveness from God, from the king, from the governor, and from the people of the colony for his sins. The governor said, and contently listened to it all. And then he rose. He looked Mr. Bacon square to the eye, for I saw it with my own. Mr. Bacon, God forgive you, I forgive you. Repeating those words. God forgive you, I forgive you. And then he sat back down. Rose again after what seemed like eternity. He looked at all of us and back to Mr. Bacon. Mr. Bacon, if you can live civilly until the next quarter court, doubling this, until the next quarter court, I will restore you to your place on the council. Now, of course, you knew, I failed to mention, so new in the colony because of his relations with both the governor, the governor's wife, and Mr. Nathaniel Bacon, senior of this colony, many years in this colony. He had been put on the council after just beyond a year of dwelling here. Then he had been condemned a rebel, then elected as a burgess. But the governor spoke to him. Until the next quarter court, I will restore you to your seat on the council. No one again dared speak a word, but we were set back by this. We were then dismissed. We went back above stairs to conduct our business. And again, I was thrown into these intrigues, representing the people of Stafford as best I could. Several days after this incident, I came below stairs, passed by on my way out, and happened to glance into the council chamber, and there sat Nathaniel Bacon in his usual seat. Again, back above stairs, much speculation of what had caused this to play, and it was determined by all. it was a means for the governor to keep a closer eye on Mr. Bacon, for fear that he would rise himself up again. On the 12th of June, there was a great baroot out in the common here. We had heard Mr. Bacon's wife had taken ill. The story that was circulated on the 12th, it became known that he had gone upriver to see her. But no sooner was his ship beyond sight, he was bound to raise an army. He was coming back to seek a commission to fight the Indians. In the days that turned into beyond a week, from the 12th, every 2-3 days, another missive from upriver. Mr. Bacon's army, 50 men. 3 days later, 150. 3 days later, 200, 300. On the 24th of June, he returned with an army of 400 men. He arrived at the walls and marched himself into the common to the beat of several drums. He himself was betwixt 2 files of fusils, short muskets. Very proud he was as he approached the State House. They halted just here. We were conducting our morning business, and we were allowed our noonday respite. At 2 o'clock, the drum beat to call us back to session. We went above stairs. Not beyond 2:30 it was, that a great commotion ensued. When Mr. Bacon had brought his men together, they marched toward the State House door and stood there. The governor had been in the council in chamber. He came forth, and we above stairs, looking out of the windows down, the windows closed, could not hear the business, but could plainly see the governor step out upon the stoop. As this played, my eye caught several of the miners of my sloop who were motioning for me with a great urgency to come down to join them in the back of this business. The State House is a back stair that I went down, came about and circled about just here. I joined my miners only to see Mr. Bacon walking behind the governor making his way to his private apartment. The miners explained to me what had occurred as I was making my way down, but I will allow you what I know as it truly occurred. When Mr. Bacon arrived at the door, the governor stepped down. For then that I began my motion to come about down and around. Apparently, the governor, angered by Mr. Bacon and this mob, armed with everything from cudgels to muskets to scythes to sickles. The governor, stepping out on the stoop, ripped open his waistcoat and shirt and said to him, challenging, "Here, for God, fair mark shoot, let us settle this civilly amongst ourselves." To which Mr. Bacon replied, "No, if it please your honor, we will not harm a hair upon your head or any other man's. We have come for a commission to save ourselves from the Indians, which you have so often promised, and now we shall have it before we go." This incensed the governor. He denied Mr. Bacon's request. He would never consider it, not in this circumstance, with an armed mob to force him. The governor then turned on his heel and began to walk away. Mr. Bacon, with his sword hand to his side, then his hand his sword hand to his sword, followed behind him, making rude gestures with his hands as he followed him. The governor, very deliberate as he walked his way. 4 or 5 steps into, Mr. Bacon stopped. He turned to the men under arms with the fusils. He looked at those peering from the window, and he looked at the governor, still walking away. And he said, "God damn my blood, I will kill governor, council, assembly, and all, and then sheathe my sword in my own heart's blood." And with that, he turned to his fusiliers and gave the command, "Make ready and take aim." And they, with their slow match cocked in their muskets, raised them toward all of the assemblymen peering out of the windows. So near was the calamity at this moment. And this paroxysm of frenetic fury. Had but he drawn his sword, apparently, the command for them to fire. He continued to follow the governor, making those outrageous gestures, as if he could not fully commit himself to what he knew truly he desired to do. One of the senior members of Burgess, upon seeing all this, in the longest moment it was, the muskets facing, opened the window, took out his kerchief and waved it. It's a kind gesture. You shall have it.
It's under you now.
You shall have it.
It's a worm.
And with that, they lowered the fusil. The governor went into his apartment. Mr. Bacon returned. They retired this far, somewhere here. An hour later, Mr. Bacon came up upstairs to the assembly, demanding that we write him a commission. And we, as gentle, as genteel, as proper, and as respectful as we could, informed him that it was not in our means to do such a thing. That was reserved only for the governor, the king's appointed representative. Mr. Bacon, after haranguing the seat an hour, came below stairs. The same to the governor. Several days later, we heard the governor had granted him a commission. Mr. Bacon then gathered his soldiers, such as they were, and marched toward the Dragon, the north and west of here, to wage war against friendly Pamunkey Indians, Indians that we had held treaty with for 30 years, Indians that had served us to aid us against fighting those Indians further to the west that would infringe upon our territory, Indians we held a treaty with, and he waged war against. The Queen, Kakakoeski of the Pamunkey, who had a son by a former governor's brother of this colony. She sought some relief, and there was none to be granted, for everyone seemed to have turned toward Mr. Bacon. The governor rode from Jamestown to Gloucester, raised the king's standard, gave a great speech, I am told, and at the end of it, several hundred people that had borne it all just walked away, fearing if they were to anger Mr. Bacon, what the reprisal would be. The governor, defeated, came back here, boarded ships, and adventured himself to the eastern shore, to one of the Custis's, there to gather an army to come back. Mr. Bacon continued to wage war against the Pamunkeys that summer, in July, he issued his Declaration of the People, where he enumerated all the wrongs of the government, turning a deaf ear to the security. As well, Mr. Bacon in his declaration allowed that any who would come to take up arms with him, once the king recognized Mr. Bacon as being right, they would hold places in his army. The indented perhaps would be freed, as would the enslaved that would take arms with him. It's a hard thing, all of this, I know. And I'm going to remove you up just a bit further for the saddest of this tale, as I will recount it. Last year, the governor, having removed himself to the eastern shore, managed to capture several vessels that had been sent by Bacon to capture the governor. Turning the tide then, he came back here on the 7th of September. Arriving at the wharves, he had several of the cannon that were placed downriver for fear that the Dutch would sail up and attempt to attack, moved over to the isthmus to defend Bacon against Bacon if he attempted to attack by land. Mr. Bacon, no sooner hearing the governor was here, set his men in motion to march here. They too with cannon. They arrived on the far side of the isthmus. It is the place where many years ago the glass house was, Glass House Point. And they dug in there, set the artillery up, and then did something that none of us had ever dreamed possible. None of us ever thought could occur. Mr. Bacon went into the countryside and found the wives of the governor's supporters. He brought them back here, stood them in front to the sides of his artillery, and then began to fire at Jamestown, bombarding the town, knowing that the defenders here, the governor's followers, dare not fire back for fear they would pierce the breasts of those that they loved the most. For 2 days, this stalemate, and then the true battle began. On the 14th of September, Mr. Bacon released the wives, and the battle began in earnest. Back and forth, the artillery. Men were killed on both sides. I've heard mayhaps as many as 12 to 15, some have said as many as 30. But it made no matter. The town was being bombarded. The governor, on the 19th, determining that he was desirous to save this place for the sanctity of it, for what it meant, not wanting to see the capital destroyed. After a meeting to discuss what might be, he and his followers boarded ships and went down the river, abandoning the colony, thinking it the more noble cause to leave it as it is. In the afternoon, September 19th, Mr. Bacon and his men triumphantly came to town. They held a council of war, and it was determined that they should destroy it all, so that Mr. Bacon would have nothing but the glory to glow in, that he had destroyed the most precious thing to the governor. The governor would not have any place to come back to. As the sun slowly sank to the west. The town was torched. It's said that Mr. Lawrence burned his own tavern, Mr. Drummond, perhaps one of the finest houses here at Jamestown. It's said that Nathaniel Bacon himself burned the church, and that there was a great number desirous to be a part of having burnt the State House. After that, Mr. Bacon and his followers marched back to the Dragon Run swamp to once again continue to wage war against the friendly Pamunkey Indians. It was offered to me by one who seemed to know that Mr. Bacon for the next month had not one stitch of dry clothes on him. So intent was he to wage war and exterminate the Pamunkey that he remained in the swamp, taking meals there, sleeping there. On October 26th, Mr. Bacon died. Mr. Bacon, one of his favorite oaths, he used it several sundry times to us on the second floor, to the governor as well. God damn my blood. The circumstances surrounding Mr. Bacon's death are curious at best. Perhaps God granted him his word. It is said that he died of the bloody flux and the gross infestation of lice. So invested his body was of lice that his skin literally crawled after his death. Without the charismatic leader, the rebellion fell apart. A man named Ingram was named to succeed him, but could not unify the laborers, the gentlemen that had turned against the governor. The governor, in turn, hearing of these occurrences, came back from the eastern shore, went up the Pamunkey River and began to wage war against the remnants, taking pockets one by one, serving as sheriff, judge, jury, and executioner. Gallows were built, and justice, according to the governor, was dispatched. Apparently in the summer, as he had raised the standard in Gloucester, he sent a letter to the king offering that he could no longer hold his colony. And that, friends, is why now the commissioners in the army of near 1,100 men apparently is at our shore. This is what I'm going to tell the commissioners. The last that was heard of Mr. Lawrence earlier this month, January, he was seen with two others, desperados, I suspect some would call them, marching off into a snowstorm to the west. They've not been heard of. Mr. Drummond was taken up at West's Point. The governor supposedly said to him, "Mr. Drummond, I am more pleased to see you than any other man." To which Mr. Drummond, being the gentleman that he was, acknowledged, "If it please your honor," and the governor allowed to him, "You will hang within an hour." And he did so. Gentles, there's much confusion in the colony now. There's a great number of people that are talking of nonsense. This place is strong. We are strong people. But we have been influenced by two very strong individuals. that is set to tear us apart. I know not how it's played, but I assure you I will not take sides in this. There were concerns some say the governor did not address. But I leave that to each of you and how you look at your place in all of this business. Have ye queries toward me before I part? And I believe none of you have them. I believe that not for a moment.
Mr. Matthews,
Aye?
would you help rebuild the government in Jamestown? In
Madam,
Colonial?
I am a merchant. I am not a statesman.
Okay.
As I speak, I was elected because of the minimum that I had in this business. The fact that it was